Sophia stood in the center of the kitchen, her fingers brushing lightly over the counter her father once cleaned by hand. The kitchen hadn't changed much over the years. The paint was chipped, the tiles slightly cracked, but the soul of the room, it was still alive, still pulsing with warmth, with memory, with something you couldn't quite name. The scent hit her first, not just food, but memory. That distinct blend of simmered marinara, sautéed garlic, and Antonio's cologne, Old Spice, mixed with kitchen smoke, still lingered in the bricks, in the floorboards, in the very air she breathed. She closed her eyes. She could almost hear him humming Sinatra, almost feel the weight of his arm gently guiding hers as they stirred a pot of sauce together. "You don't measure love in cups," he used to say. "You feel it right here." And she did. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was the last place he ever smiled, the last place he ever stood before that heart attack took him right in the middle of lunch rush, still perfecting his bolognese. Sophia reached for the wooden spoon, the same one her father carved with a pocket knife when she was 6. The handle still had a small chip in it from the day she dropped it during her first attempt at flambé. She smiled just barely. It wasn't just about food. It was about him. About every laugh, every lesson, every late-night cleanup, while he told her stories of how he met her mom over handmade ravioli. This kitchen was a church, and every plate they served was a prayer. But lately, the prayers had been quieter. The walls didn't echo with joy the same way. Something cold had started creeping in. Sophia didn't want to name it, but deep down, she knew. Change was coming, and not the kind that brought hope. She looked around one last time, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I won't lose this. Not without a fight." Grief doesn't always cry. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it marries the wrong man. That man was Gerald. He showed up at a time when everything was broken. Antonio Moretti had passed, the house was quiet, the kitchen no longer sang. Sophia was drowning in the weight of responsibility, trying to keep Moretz alive, trying to keep her mother from fading. And into that silence, Gerald slid in like oil on a wet floor. He was polished, confident, too confident. With his real estate smile, his pressed shirts, and his habit of calling Sophia kiddo, like she was some inconvenient stain on a white tablecloth. He never cared about Moretz. Never stepped foot in the kitchen, unless it was to complain about the smell of garlic. He called it that little pizza joint. To him, tradition was something to bulldoze. Culture was something to package and sell. He didn't love Linda. Not really. He loved what she owned. The house, the restaurant, the life insurance payout. And as for Sophia, she was just a reminder that someone else had loved Linda better. So he ignored her, dismissed her, treated her like the leftover crust of a meal he didn't order. But Gerald was patient. He played the long game, smiling through dinners, whispering to Linda when she was tired, helpful during her surgeries. He waited until her guard was down, until the grief turned into guilt, until the silence became obedience. And then, only then, he started moving in on everything Antonio had left behind. It started small. A chair was missing. Not just any chair. His chair. The leather one, with cracked arms and a faint smell of espresso and kitchen smoke. The one Antonio Moretti used to sink into after long shifts, towel over his shoulder, whispering, "One day, this place will be yours." Now it was gone. In its place stood some sleek, modern monstrosity, white leather, chrome legs, hollow, like something out of a hotel lobby. Sophia stood frozen. She hadn't even noticed it right away. But once she did, everything changed. Because that chair wasn't just furniture. It was a marker of who belonged here, of who held the soul of the house. And now it was gone. Gerald didn't say a word about it, didn't ask, didn't explain, as if removing the past didn't require permission. That silence, it was louder than any scream. He didn't touch Sophia's things, not yet, but she knew he would. Little by little, the house was shifting. Antonio's framed culinary awards disappeared from the hallway. The signed photo of him with the mayor, gone. His apron thrown in a box in the garage. Sophia walked past her father's old study one morning and stopped cold. The door was open. Inside, Gerald was sitting at the desk flipping through old recipe notebooks like they were junk mail. No reverence, no respect, just greed disguised as curiosity. Sophia didn't say anything. She just watched. And in that moment, she knew. Gerald wasn't trying to become part of the family. He was trying to replace it. The text came at 4:37 p.m. Family meeting, 1 hour. Just 4 words, but they hit harder than any scream. Sophia stared at the screen, her pulse rising. Family. Gerald had never called her that. Not once. Not at the wedding, not during holidays. To him, she was always Linda's daughter. A footnote, a shadow, an inconvenience. And now, suddenly, he was calling a family meeting. Something was wrong. No, scratch that. Everything was wrong. Sophia typed back quickly. Can't. Friday dinner rush starts in 2 hours. No reply. Then a second text. This is above the restaurant. Be here. Her stomach dropped. Gerald never pushed. He didn't need to. He manipulated quietly through smiles and passive slights. But this was commanding, urgent. This had the scent of a trap. Sophia looked around the restaurant. Moretti's was bustling, the kitchen alive, the prep team humming, servers checking stations. It was Friday night, their busiest of the week, the kind of night where every detail mattered. And yet, she threw off her apron. Because if Gerald was finally making a move, she needed to know what the hell he was planning, even if it meant walking into the fire. The moment Sophia stepped through the front door, she knew. This wasn't her house anymore. The scent was the first betrayal. Gone was the familiar mix of tomato sauce, cinnamon, coffee, and floor polish. Now the air smelled like cold lavender and cedarwood, artificial and sterile, like a hotel lobby, like something trying way too hard to forget the past. She glanced at the walls. The photo of her and her dad at her high school graduation, gone. The framed Best Chef in Austin award replaced by generic abstract art. And worst of all, Antonio's wedding photo with Linda, the one taken in Moretti's on the night he proposed, nowhere in sight. It was like someone had erased him. No, not just him. They had erased them all. Sophia walked deeper into the house, her footsteps echoing too loudly against tile that used to be warm hardwood. Even the light bulbs had been swapped cool-toned, clinical, empty. The living room was rearranged. Her father's chair, gone. His bookshelf, gone. His scent, gone. And in his place, Gerald. He stood behind Linda like a politician rehearsing sympathy, wearing a smug little half smile that said he'd already won. Linda's eyes were red, but she said nothing, and Sophia knew right then this wasn't just a meeting. This was an ambush. He said it casually, like it was just another business deal, like he hadn't just carved her father's name off the front door. I sold Moretti's. 4 words, 4 deadly words. They hit Sophia like a slap to the face. No more than that, like a knife to the chest. She blinked, unsure she heard him right. You, what? Gerald smiled smug and rehearsed. Sold the restaurant. Found a buyer willing to pay over market value. $3 million, Sophia. Can you believe it? For that little place? That little place. Sophia's hands curled into fists at her sides. That little place was where she learned to stir marinara at 6 years old, where her dad proposed to her mom, where she scattered his ashes in the basil garden behind the kitchen. Her voice came out low, sharp. You can't sell it. You don't own it. But Gerald was ready. He pulled out a folder like it was a trick he'd been waiting to reveal. Actually, I do. When I married your mother, all her assets became marital property, including her shares in the restaurant. Sophia's heart dropped, but she fired back. She only had 49%. I own 51%. My dad left it that way on purpose." Gerald chuckled. He actually wagged his finger at her. "Ah, but you're forgetting something important. The power of attorney." And just like that, the room tipped sideways. Sophia turned to Linda. "Mom, you didn't." Her mother couldn't look at her. "It was just for medical decisions," she whispered. "When I had the surgery, Gerald said that a comprehensive POA would be better." Gerald cut in smug. "To cover all bases. As Linda's representative, I had every legal right." Sophia felt her knees go weak. Her breath stuck in her chest. He had stolen it. Not just a restaurant, a legacy, a memory, a future. And he had done it with a smile. Gerald placed the folder on the table with the slow, deliberate flair of a man who thought he was brilliant. "It's all legal," he said. "Everything was signed. Everything was approved. No loopholes." He said it like he was proud, like it was a masterstroke. But to Sophia, it wasn't legal. It was betrayal printed on white paper. She stared at the signature, her mother's name, Linda Moretti, in shaky, barely legible ink. Sophia remembered the day her mom came home from surgery. Weak, groggy, barely able to stand. That's when Gerald pounced. He said it was just a precaution, just something to handle medical stuff, just in case. But now he was using it to sell the only thing Antonio left behind. "You tricked her," Sophia said, voice cold. "She trusted you, and you used that to steal from both of us." Gerald didn't even flinch. "I followed the law," he shrugged. "If you have a problem with that, maybe you should have paid better attention to the paperwork." Sophia clenched her jaw. It wasn't just the papers, it was the way he looked at her, like she was stupid, like he'd already won. But he didn't understand something crucial. Sophia wasn't broken. She was furious. And fury is harder to control than grief. Gerald leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with condescension. "Look, Sophia, it's time to let the professionals handle this." Professionals. That word hung in the air like an insult dipped in syrup. You played restaurant while the adults weren't watching. Sophia froze. 5 years. 5 years of 16-hour days, burnt hands, broken refrigerators, last-minute vendor cancellations, payroll stress, sleepless nights, all of it reduced to a child's game in Gerald's mouth. He continued, smug and dismissive, "You had a good run. But $3 million? That's real money. You've got to know when to step aside." He said it like he was doing her a favor, like she should thank him. But Sophia didn't move. She just stared at him. And for the first time, she saw him clearly, not just as a liar, but as a parasite. He'd never built anything, not with his hands, not with his heart. He bought and flipped, sold and smiled. He used other people's work as stepping stones. But Moret's, it wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary, and she had bled for it. "You don't get to call this playing," she said through clenched teeth. "You weren't there when the pipes burst at 2 a.m. You weren't there when Dad died in that kitchen. You weren't there ever." Gerald shrugged. "And that's why I can make smart decisions. I'm not emotional about it." No, he wasn't. And that was exactly the problem. Gerald flipped the final page in the folder like a magician revealing his last trick. "The buyer is James Morrison," he said, grinning. "Big name. Owns that whole chain of sports bars downtown." Sophia's heart stopped. James Morrison. She'd heard the name before. The man who took historic diners and turned them into beer and wings factories. He didn't cook. He didn't care about tradition. He cared about flat screens and frozen fries. She could already see it, her father's hand-built wine rack replaced with neon beer signs. The smell of garlic swapped for cheap fryer oil. Handmade ravioli replaced by microwaved jalapeno poppers. He's already drawn up renovation plans, Gerald added. Big screens, wood paneling, pool tables. Gonna tear out the herb garden and expand the patio. Tear out the herb garden? That's where her dad used to sit every Sunday morning, coffee in hand, planning out specials, clipping fresh basil with scissors dulled by love and time. And now it would be a place for drunk 20-somethings to spill beer and throw darts. Sophia's throat tightened. "You're turning it into a joke," she said quietly. "A place where my father poured his life, and you're letting some stranger turn it into a frat house." Gerald shrugged. "That stranger offered $3 million. That's not a joke, that's business." No, it wasn't business. It was butchery. And unless she acted now, her father's legacy would die under the hum of a cheap ceiling fan and the sound of beer pong. She sat alone in her office. The kitchen behind her buzzed with life, clanging pots, shouted orders, the smell of garlic bread baking. But inside Sophia, only silence. The kind of silence that comes after the hit, after the betrayal, after your soul has been knocked breathless. She looked around dazed. The desk, the shelves. The picture of her dad smiling in front of Moret's on opening day. The echo of his voice saying, "This place will always be yours, kiddo." But now it wasn't. Not unless she did something. And then she saw it, tucked under a stack of invoices. Still unopened. Still waiting. The folder. Marcus Richardson. Weeks ago, he had approached her with interest in buying Moret's. Not to flip it, not to gut it, but to grow it. He respected the story, the legacy, the recipes. She'd said no, because back then, Moret's wasn't for sale. But now it was already being ripped away. With trembling hands, she opened it, and what she saw inside wasn't just a purchase offer. It was a lifeline. It was past 11 p.m. The diner was nearly empty, just the hum of a soda machine and the soft clink of silverware on ceramic. Sophia slid into a cracked vinyl booth. Across from her sat Marcus Richardson. No suit, no briefcase. Just a tired button-down, rolled-up sleeves, and the kind of quiet that didn't need to prove anything. He didn't start with small talk. No pitch, no pressure. Just this, "You called, I'm here." Sophia nodded. For a moment, they sat in silence. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her throat since she opened the folder. "If I sell to you, what happens to Moret's?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Nothing, not a thing. We keep the name, the staff, the recipes, everything." "I don't want to change Moret's. I want to honor it, grow it, maybe open another one someday. But this one, this stays sacred." Sophia blanked. No neon signs, no pool tables, no frozen appetizers, just Moret's. "How much?" she asked quietly. Marcus pulled a folded offer sheet from his pocket, slid it across the table. $3.5 million, he said. "We're ready. Lawyers are on standby. You just say the word." Sophia stared at the paper. She wasn't just seeing numbers. She was seeing a second chance. Not to sell out, but to fight smart. Sophia took a deep breath. She looked Marcus in the eye, not as a desperate daughter, not as a grieving chef, but as a woman ready to strike. "There's one condition," she said. "We sign everything before 10 a.m. tomorrow." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. Done. No hesitation, no ego. Just mutual respect, the kind that comes when two people know they're fighting for something bigger than money. They shook hands across sticky diner laminate, and just like that, the rules changed. For the first time since Gerald's ambush, Sophia wasn't reacting. She was leading. She wasn't thinking like a daughter anymore. She was thinking like a CEO. Time was short, but her fire was back. She left the diner with a plan burning in her chest. The storm was coming. But now, she had lightning in her hands. Gerald was glowing. He strutted through the house in polished shoes and a $600 suit that still had the tag tucked inside the sleeve. His hair was overly slicked, his cologne strong enough to knock out a waiter. He had laid out the dining room like a corporate war room, legal pads stacked, pens aligned, fresh coffee brewed, printed contracts waiting like trophies. This was it, his moment. The day he'd walk away with $3 million and finally prove to Linda, to Sophia, to the world that he was more than just the second husband. He rehearsed lines in the mirror, practiced his handshake, tried different smiles, charming, serious, fatherly. He didn't notice Linda's silence, didn't care that she looked pale and withdrawn, didn't question why she hadn't said a word since breakfast. This was his victory lap. And nothing, not even the ghost of Antonio Moretti, was going to ruin it. At 11:45, he looked at his watch. "Perfect timing," he muttered, smoothing his lapels. "Let's make history." He didn't know that history was already being written by the very woman he tried to erase. The doorbell rang. Gerald practically ran to answer it, rehearsed charm ready to explode. He opened the door to find James Morrison, mid-50s, thick-necked, polo shirt stretched over his gut, sunglasses still on indoors. "Jim, come in," Gerald beamed. "Coffee, water, I've got the papers ready." Morrison grunted, barely making eye contact. "Let's just get this done. Contractors are lined up for Monday." He dropped a worn leather folder on the table and pulled out his phone. Then he froze. His brows furrowed, his thumb tapped, swiped, tapped again. "Hold up," Morrison muttered. "This can't be right." Gerald blinked. "What's wrong?" Morrison turned the screen toward him. "This says Moretti was sold yesterday to Richardson Hospitality Group." The blood drained from Gerald's face. Before he could respond, Sophia stepped through the doorway. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just presence, sharp as glass and cold as steel. "It's true," she said calmly. "The sale was finalized this morning, 10:17 a.m. to be exact." Morrison stared at her, then back at Gerald. "You sold me a restaurant that isn't yours?" Gerald stammered, opened his mouth, closed it again. Sophia laid the contract on the table like a playing card. "I own 51%, she said. "I don't need permission to sell what's mine." And just like that, the air cracked. Gerald wasn't the boss anymore. He was just a man in a cheap suit, outplayed. The room fell silent. Gerald stared at the signed contract Sophia had just dropped like a hammer. Morrison was no longer interested in coffee. He was staring at Gerald like he'd just been scammed. Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I own 51% of Moretti's," she said, cool and calm. "And according to Texas corporate law, that gives me majority control, including the power to sell." She turned to Morrison, her voice razor sharp. "What Gerald tried to sell you was the minority share, 49%. No control, no ownership of recipes, brand, staff, or legacy." Morrison's face flushed red. "You dragged me into this circus for a stake I can't even use." He stood up, eyes locked on Gerald. "You'd better refund my deposit, all of it." Gerald's lips moved, but no sound came out. Sophia wasn't finished. She pulled out a final document, notarized, signed, dated. "Here's the official transfer. The deal with Richardson closed yesterday, and unlike you, Marcus respects what this place means." She stepped closer, leaned in just enough. "You treated my father's legacy like a poker chip. I treat it like a promise." Then she turned to her mother, standing quietly in the hallway. "Mom, now you know." Gerald's face turned pale, not just pale like fear, but the kind of pale that says everything is over. Morrison snatched his deposit check off the table, his voice booming. "You owe me 50 grand, and I swear if you don't send it by tonight, you'll be dealing with more than lawyers." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard a photo of Antonio rattled on the wall. Gerald sat down slowly, his hands trembling. No more swagger, no more smirks, just a man undone. Then came the voice he feared most. "Was this your plan all along, Linda?" She stepped forward from the hallway, eyes no longer soft, but sharp. You used me. You waited until I was sick to get power of attorney. You never cared about Antonio's dream or about me. Gerald opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. Don't. Just don't. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. It carried 5 years of trust burned to ash. You said you were helping me. You said you loved me. She paused. But you were stealing from my daughter, from a dead man. Silence. Then the soft sound of footsteps. Sophia walked over and stood beside her mother. No gloating, no smugness, just quiet strength. And for the first time, Gerald realized he was no longer part of the family. Gerald snapped. The calm, polished man who once called himself a strategic investor was now screaming in his own living room like a cornered animal. You'll pay for this, Sophia. You all will. He knocked over a chair, grabbed a folder, flung it across the room. Papers rained down like dead feathers. This was mine. I built this deal. You don't get to take it away from me. But no one responded. Linda didn't flinch. Sophia didn't blink. The power Gerald once had was gone. The louder he yelled, the smaller he became. I'll sue all of you. I'll drag you through court. Still, silence. It was over. Not because he lost money, but because he lost respect. Because when a man lies, manipulates, and uses people to climb, there's no one left to catch him when he falls. And now, even his wife wasn't looking at him anymore. She looked past him, toward something better, toward freedom. Linda stood still, not out of fear, but clarity. Her eyes swept the room, the mess Gerald made, the quiet resolve on Sophia's face, and in her mind a memory came alive. Antonio, years ago standing in that same kitchen, flour on his apron, saying, "Our daughter's got more fire in her than both of us combined." And he was right. Sophia didn't just survive. She didn't just rebuild. She outsmarted a man who thought manipulation was intelligence. Linda turned slowly toward Gerald. He was panting, red, defeated, a caricature of power now stripped bare. "My daughter," Linda said calmly, "just outsmarted you." She walked toward Sophia and gently took her hand. Her voice softened, but her words struck like thunder. "And I've never been prouder." In that moment, the bond between mother and daughter, bent, bruised, but unbroken, was reforged. It didn't erase the years of silence, but it ended them. With one sentence, Linda closed one chapter and opened another. The sign was simple, elegant. Sophia's, just her name. But it meant everything. Opening night. The room buzzed with laughter, music, and the aroma of lemon zest and slow-roasted tomatoes. No velvet ropes, no VIP lists, just food and heart. In the center of it all, Sophia stood in a crisp white apron, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. Calm, confident, home. Then he arrived, Marcus Richardson, holding two things. 1, a chilled bottle of champagne. 2, a small framed photo of Antonio Moretti. "Thought you might want to hang him somewhere close," he said. Sophia blinked fast. She wasn't expecting to cry, but the sight of her father smiling in his chef's coat, holding a ladle, broke something open. She took the frame, ran her fingers along the glass. "Right above the stove," she whispered. He always said the flame was the heart of every kitchen. Together they hung it. And for the first time in years, Sophia didn't feel like she was rebuilding her father's legacy. She was living her own. By the end of that year, Linda had filed for divorce, not just because of the Moretts' betrayal, but because she discovered Gerald had swindled others too. Investments, pensions, even her best friend's retirement fund. It was over, for real. But something beautiful came out of the wreckage. Every Sunday evening, without fail, Linda walked through the door of Sophia's, carrying a small bouquet of rosemary and thyme. She'd sit at the counter where she could watch Sophia cook, and over the soft hiss of olive oil and garlic, she told stories. Your father once burned 30 pounds of gnocchi trying to impress a Michelin inspector. He used to sneak cannoli into your lunchbox when I said no more sugar. He danced in the kitchen, Sophia, like no one was watching. Sophia would laugh, wiping her hands on a towel, occasionally pausing to write down a recipe or a memory. The food was good, but on Sundays, it tasted like home. Sophia once asked her father, "What makes food taste unforgettable?" Antonio didn't hesitate. "Love," he said. "But if you're building a business, add brains to the recipe." Years later, those words were no longer advice. They were legacy. Because when betrayal came knocking, Sophia didn't crumble. She thought. She loved. And then she acted. She didn't fight Gerald with fists. She fought him with facts. She didn't protect Moretz with rage. She protected it with reverence. And when it was time to let go, she didn't mourn. She evolved. Now Sophia's name stands proudly above a door. But what's behind that door? A flame that never dies. A kitchen filled with music and memory, and a woman who finally knows the real inheritance isn't just the business. It's knowing when to protect and when to begin again. Somewhere in the outskirts of Houston, in a faded strip mall between a pawn shop and a vape store, Gerald now sells used cars, beat-up vans, scratched-up sedans, and the same old story. I would have been a millionaire if it weren't for my wife's bratty daughter. He tells it over bad coffee and under flickering fluorescent lights. To anyone who'll listen. Most don't. Meanwhile, just 3 hours north, Sophia stands in her restaurant's open kitchen, surrounded by aromas, laughter, and warmth. She never mentions Gerald. She doesn't have to. Her food speaks for itself. Her staff calls her chef, and the city calls her place a culinary landmark. Sophia didn't just save her father's dream, she turned a legacy into a legend. And that is the taste of real justice. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones earned in silence. You don't always need to scream fight or get even. All you need is clarity, courage, and consistency. When love is your compass and wisdom is your weapon, you don't just survive betrayal, you turn it into legacy. So whether you're protecting your dream, your dignity, or your name, never forget, brains and love. That's the ultimate recipe. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful tales of strength, justice, and soul. Every week, we bring you a new story that reminds you your voice matters. Your story deserves to be heard. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the next turn in the journey.